Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. State Senator Emil Jones III pleads not guilty to charges he took bribes from a red light camera firm and that he lied to the FBI. Jones entered his plea in federal court today after being charged earlier this week in a criminal information. That's a court document that is typically filed in cases where the defendant has indicated they eventually plan to enter a plea down the road. Now, Jones has resigned his committee chairmanship role in the Illinois Senate, but is thus far rebuffing calls from those in his own party, including Governor J.B. Pritzker, to resign his seat outright. He is running unopposed for re-election this November, and the next court hearing in the case is scheduled for November 4th. A man who was seriously wounded in a building explosion in South Austin earlier this week has died. The Chicago Fire Department confirms that one male victim who had suffered extensive burns in the blast died from his injuries. The man was 29 years old, according to Cook County Medical Examiner records. The explosion occurred at approximately 9 a.m. Tuesday inside a four-story 35-unit apartment building near West End and North Central Avenues. 8 people were injured in the blast. Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Lori Lightfoot were on hand to unveil a new design for the University of Illinois' Discovery Partners Institute. The headquarters building is slated to be built in the 78 development south of Roosevelt Road in the South Loop, part of a massive tech and science hub funded by both the state and the U of I system. The building is said to provide office, classroom, lab, and event space and should break ground in 2024.
This partnership gives Chicagoland residents an opportunity to develop the technical skills that are needed to kickstart a new career in data science, in software development, in digital marketing, UX design, robotic process automation, information technology, and other tech-related fields.
And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Paul Sullivan, longtime columnist and baseball writer for the Chicago Tribune, Alice Yin, politics reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Steve Daniels, senior reporter at Crain's Chicago Business, and Hannah Meisel, Illinois government and politics editor for NPR Illinois and Illinois Public Radio. Let's get right to it. Hannah Meisel, Governor Pritzker is calling for 2 members of his own party to step down amid election season here. They are Emil Jones, who we mentioned, but also State Senator Mike Hastings. Remind us why Senator Hastings is in a precarious position.
Well, Mike Hastings is in the middle of a contentious divorce, and in those divorce proceedings, some information has come out, kind of slow drip of reporting from very, very hyper-local media outlets in the south suburbs where he's from about allegations of, abusing his wife. This week, I think last week, we've also seen allegations from a state house lobbyist who says that Hastings is, a bully. This is something that I think a lot of people have said behind the scenes for a long time. But, so Governor Pritzker wanted to get out in front of both of these things, especially after this week, the Tribune had a headline that wasn't the most flattering. It said that the governor kind of deflected on corruption. That was on Wednesday. And then I don't think it's a surprise that on very early Thursday morning, the governor was calling on both of these state senators to resign. They've already resigned their leadership posts, and Emil Jones has resigned his committee chairmanship, something that he gets paid, almost $12,000 a year for. But, the governor wanted to get out ahead on this, and I think it's not shocking. I mean, when we go back to 2020, the way that he handled the Mike Madigan, this was prior to Mike Madigan getting indicted earlier this year, when those associates of Mike Madigan involved in the ComEd scandal were indicted in November of 2020. The governor kind of fumbled his call. And so I think, this
so as you said, the governor trying to get out in front of this. And Hannah, we mentioned in the case of Senator Emil Jones and allegedly taking bribes from the red light camera company, the feds issued their charges in a criminal information, which usually means a plea deal is in the works. But the timing's weird here because Jones is running for re-election unopposed. So do you suppose he wants to win re-election and then enter whatever agreement that they might be cooking up?
I mean, I think there's a variety of factors at play here. I mean, one, it would be very messy to have to have to kind of replace him on the ballot. We've already passed the point where the State Board of Elections has certified ballots, or what's supposed to be on the November ballot. And then also, we've seen in a number of cases like this in the last several years, people like the late State Senator Marty Sandoval, former Representative Louis Arroyo, they held on to their seats so that they could get, keep getting their salaries and healthcare. Now, there's been a law in the last couple of years that's been passed to kind of prorate, those benefits as, people get, if they leave office or, if they're in whatever. So, yes,
and especially those pensions, Hannah. I mean, the salary is not so great for a state legislator, but those pension benefits are sought after. I want to move back home to Chicago here. Mayor Lightfoot had some choice words for the CEO of McDonald's after he had some choice words about the state of the city. Take a look.
Well, I think that what would have been helpful is for the McDonald's CEO to educate himself before he spoke. We've had, though, some productive conversations with other members of his leadership team. I think you saw that McDonald's itself put out a full-page ad talking about their full support of the city of Chicago. I'm going to look on productive engagement and not look in the rearview mirror.
Steve Daniels, the comments Mr. Kempczinski, the CEO of McDonald's, made before an economic club forum were that, going around the country, Chicago has this reputation that it's dangerous. It's harder to recruit managers, harder to recruit employees. Why is this drawing the mayor's ire so much?
Well, I think it's something she's understandably defensive about. There is an issue with Chicago's reputation, and obviously we've got these recent examples of heavyweight corporations moving out of town, citing one of them at least, Ken Griffin's Citadel, citing the crime problem as a principal reason. You've got a Caterpillar moving its headquarters to Texas. So these are not good optics at all for a city in terms of its business climate. And then to have Chris Kempczinski in a very public forum, essentially, I want to be fair to him. I think he was chiding the city, but at the same time was saying, "Hey, we want to get behind a plan. Let's have a plan. It's not okay the way it is right now, but let's get behind something." So at any rate, her reaction was very much in line with how she typically reacts to these sorts of things. And, McDonald's quickly put out that ad saying, "Hey, we love Chicago. We like being here." But that doesn't change the issue. And the issue is crime is something of concern to both residents and businesses in the city, and that's just a fact.
That's how I read the CEO's original comments, not ripping the city per se, but saying, it's just a fact that there's this perception out there, and it is having an impact. But Paul Sullivan, is it the most productive approach here if you're the mayor to try and take a swipe at the CEO of one of the marquee corporations still left in Chicago?
No, but it's not surprising. I mean, that's kind of been her MO in her whole term, and she's, running again, obviously. And this is going to be an issue that's going to come up in the election. I travel a lot, and, the reputation of Chicago is not very good. The crime is, I would say, rampant. So people are afraid to get on the L. They're afraid to go downtown. This is not something that people take lightly, and I wish more corporate leaders would speak out on this.
Do you see that, Paul, when you're traveling, following the Sox or the Cubs? I mean, from other folks in Major League Baseball, asking you, "Hey, what's going on in Chicago?"
Yeah, I mean, they see it on TV all the time, all the shootings, and obviously, there are statistics that show it's not the worst crime city in America. There are, other cities with even worse problems than Chicago. But I think the fact that it's ongoing and that when it does happen, it's mass shootings, people take notice of that. And it's not something that's going to go away until they solve the issue. And Mayor Lightfoot is in charge of the city. So, it's really up to her to get things moving.
Right, and per capita, Chicago is usually not really even in the top 10, but the perception still remains out there because of the sheer number. Let's move on. A new alderperson from Lincoln Park, 43rd Ward, is sworn in by City Council this week. Here's a little bit of what Tim Knudsen had to say Wednesday, right before he was confirmed.
What is clear to me is that the 43rd Ward seeks fresh leadership. Neighbors have told me they want an alderman who will fight for public safety and public schools, foster open dialogue, and champion local community leaders and organizations at every step of the way. As alderman, I will work every day to answer that call. I'm honored to have a new way to give back to the community I call home and the opportunity to bring a new perspective to the 43rd Ward and to Chicago City Council.
Allison, who is Tim Knudsen, and am I pronouncing his last name correct?
Timmy Knudsen.
Knudsen, okay.
Yeah, and the Timmy part's also important.
So he insists on going by Timmy.
Yes, correct. Yeah, he was the Zoning Board of Appeals chair. He previously worked as a lawyer. He has done pro bono work helping LGBTQ asylum seekers in Chicago and Tijuana. And he is also a Lightfoot supporter from 2019.
And he's one of a handful of alder people now that have their jobs because their predecessors left before the end of their term, giving Lightfoot the opportunity to appoint a successor. Is she building up kind of like a mini machine here of alder people that are going to support her?
Well, so far it seems that the three people she's appointed, they've mostly voted in line with her policies. For example, when she was pushing forward or when she was pushing back against the speed camera repeal, Monique Scott gave like a speech about car accidents in her ward and voted alongside the mayor. I imagine many other votes were similar. So yeah, so far it seems like that's the case. And as they approach campaign season before the February election and they want to campaign alongside the mayor, I don't imagine that changing much in the near future. And
as we speak, I believe we got to notice that Mayor Lightfoot is campaigning with Mr. Knudsen in his attempt to get elected to that seat in the municipal election tonight. So close allies, it appears there. Alice, also at City Council this week, they approved a practice facility for the Chicago Fire on a former Chicago Housing Authority site. A lot of folks up in arms because the CHA hasn't met its promises here on replacing some of those homes. They didn't want a practice facility to go there, and it initially failed its committee vote, and then it had the votes the next day. It passed. What changed?
Well, it seems that behind the scenes, the proponents of this plan, the mayor included, probably, wrangled some arms, got some more people to show up because during the first vote that failed, there were a lot of aldermen absent. So the no votes kind of prevailed. So yeah, after it reconvened, more aldermen showed up and it got through committee.
All right, Hannah, I want to move back to the state because there's been more rumblings about the SAFE-T Act, a.k.a. the act that, among many, many other things, is going to end the practice of cash bail and only hold offenders pre-trial for the most serious of offenses. There are rumblings now that Democrats are going to have a special session after the election to try and tweak aspects of the law. What do you imagine they might tweak?
Well, we were always going to have veto session like we have every fall, and in election years, it's always after the election. But yeah, I mean, this has been talked about for weeks, really months behind the scenes. Back in the spring in our truncated regular session, the Safety Act crime, they were huge components because in the in the Republican primary for governor, Richard Irvin, the Aurora mayor, who was very well funded by Ken Griffin, had made crime the centerpiece of his campaign. The other candidates kind of filed suit, and Darren Bailey, as the winner of the Republican, primary, he's picked up on, this, and, he's running with it. Of course, Republicans are trying to coalesce around this message to varying degrees of success. But, in terms of what should be changed, I mean, I think Democrats behind the scenes for months have acknowledged that, yes, we know that there needs to be a lot of clarifications. Some definitions within the law are not, it's causing a lot of confusion. And I think, when we talk about what has gone wrong here, the environment of misinformation, disinformation, I mean, there are three big, parties at fault here. One, the bad, those who are acting in bad faith to make the law into some sort of boogeyman ahead of the election. Two, Democrats themselves who have not done a very good job of selling this law and, telling the public what it is. It's baffling to me that Democrats have not engaged in some sort of like big money kind of campaign, because we know that they have the ability.
Hannah, I'm guessing that number three might be us, journalists, perhaps.
Yeah.
When this law came out, maybe not reporting as extensively as maybe we should. We're trying to kind of make up for that now, because this is a very complicated 700-page law. But a part of that misinformation, Steve Daniels, are these campaign mailers that are anti-Democrat, pro-Republican, that are disguised as newspapers that go out, made by Dan Proft, who is a supporter of Bailey and runs a political action committee, funded by Dick Uihlein. Governor J.B. Pritzker got really upset that the parent company, the Daily Herald, was printing and using its distribution network to send those out. And now the Daily Herald is saying we're not going to do that anymore. What do you make of that whole kerfluffle?
Yeah, it was really interesting for a lot of reasons. One of them is a publisher trying to separate the newspaper he or she publishes from their printing operation. Saying our printing operation is a printing operation. Somebody comes to us and going to pay us to print and distribute something. We're in the business of doing that too. That's not the same thing as what we publish in the newspapers that we own. That message did not fly at all, and so they quickly backtracked after the governor said that he would not participate in a debate that they were part of, citing that. And I mean, you can take different sides of that question, but just simply, I think the type of information that they were printing and publishing was a lot of the issue. If it hadn't been such a hyper partisan thing that was kind of disguised as something else, it might not have been such a problem for them.
And so now perhaps Governor Pritzker rejoins that debate. Allison, you think the governor's problems have been assuaged and he's going to go back and debate Darren Bailey? And we should mention that this was not just the Daily Herald, but AP. It was going to be a bunch of different publications conducting this debate.
Yeah, I think reading the governor's office's latest statement that they were reconsidering, I generally feel like they would not put a statement like that out if they weren't leaning more towards participating. So, yeah, I guess I would expect to see him there.
And only a handful of debates that they are doing. We should mention we have a candidate for him with NPR, and so far neither of the gubernatorial candidates have confirmed, so there's still some time there. Hint, hint. More forums, the better. Steve Daniels, Donald Trump's legal woes are mounting. The New York Attorney General Letitia James, she unveiled the massive $250 million civil suit against the Trump real estate empire, alleging basically that it's all built on fraud and chicanery. Included in that is Trump's Chicago hotel and tower. What is the alleged chicanery going on here?
Yeah, essentially what was alleged was that when the Trump organization sought loans from banks and other lenders, and something like Trump Tower Chicago was immensely valuable. But when they went and filed their taxes, something like Trump Tower Chicago was worthless. And so this is the essence of really all of the allegations in that civil suit. They just use different examples and different properties around the country. This is how Chicago's plays in that lawsuit in this aspect. I don't even think it's a central component, but it's a component. No. So it's the issue from developers' point of view is all developers kind of do this to one degree or another when it comes to their taxes and their loans. The question is really how much of the envelope got pushed here, and knowing the Trump organization, maybe it did.
And that's going to be sort of the crux of what this case is going forward. And Paul Sullivan, the former president, has this. He's got a million other legal woes mounting January 6th. And then, of course, he had some setbacks with the special master and the federal appeals court in the Mar-a-Lago case. Do you think all of this is enough to sway the Republican Party to say maybe we should get behind someone else for 2024? Or, as we've seen time and time again, nothing really moves the base from supporting Trump?
Well, my guess is that nothing is going to dissuade him from running, and if he runs, then I think he will be the nominee. It's just, it just seems like nothing ever sticks to him. He made that famous quote a few years ago that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and that seems to be the case. His polling numbers very rarely change. It's just amazing that people don't see through it, but apparently people don't.
And we'll see how these cases play out in the coming weeks. Let's move on to sports. Paul Sullivan, White Sox fans definitely see through some of the deficiencies in the organization right now. They had a must-win series against Cleveland if they wanted any shot at the playoffs, and they lost at least the first two games. What went wrong against Cleveland?
Well, yeah, they got swept in the series. It's basically over for them. There's 12 games left. They just, they came in on a little bit of a roll. They had the managerial change, Tony La Russa out with a heart issue and Miguel Cairo taking over. I think things were looking okay, but that first game, they just blew it. And then the second game, they barely even showed up. And it's kind of been that way all season where, every time you think they're going to come back and get on a little bit of a roll, they slide backwards. And it's just very agonizing, disappointing season for Sox fans, and certainly one that Jerry Reinsdorf's got to look at this organization and see what he has to do differently next year.
And Sox fans came in with so many expectations. I mean, on paper, at the beginning of the season, that lineup looked like it was a World Series caliber lineup. So many players underperformed, but then there were so many questions about the decisions of manager Tony La Russa and whether he was really even out of it for a lot of his time in the dugout. Do you expect big changes like letting La Russa go or big trades in the offseason?
I do. I find it hard to imagine La Russa being back after this year. The fans definitely have turned on him. Most of them didn't like him in the first place, but when they went to the playoffs last year, they kind of gave him a little bit of a break. But he does bear a lot of the blame for this year. I think he thought this was a push-button operation with all the talent that he could just come in and go to the World Series, and maybe the players thought that way too, but obviously that wasn't the case. I don't think he'll be back. I think most of the team is signed through next year, most of the key players. So unless they do make some trades, I don't see things changing.
And what about the front office, Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams? I mean, Jerry Reinsdorf is famously very loyal to his people. Yeah. Do you think their jobs are safe?
I think definitely Kenny Williams is safe. He's very close to Reinsdorf. Rick Hahn is a different story. He did a great job in the rebuild and getting him to this point. And then last offseason, he didn't really add on like he needed to. He didn't get any left-handed bats. He concentrated on some bullpen arms that didn't work out. So he might be a little bit in jeopardy, but knowing Reinsdorf, he'll keep both of them and then find a new manager and pretend like this year didn't even happen.
Maybe he'll find the manager that he wanted to find a couple years ago because of all the whispers that Tony La Russa, Jerry Reinsdorf's old buddy, he wanted to give him another shot after he was unceremoniously let go something like 30 or 40 years ago. Who knows? We'll never really get to the bottom of that. But Paul Sullivan, we got to get to the bottom of Justin Fields. There was just a lot of hope that he had turned a corner this year, and then he really played a dud of a game in Green Bay. Is it his fault? Is it the receiver's fault? The scheme's fault? What's going on with him?
Well, I think it's all of the above. This is definitely a year that Bears fans have said, okay, we're going to get used to losing this year, but we want to see some progress from Justin Fields. He's the main player on the team. He had a decent second half in the rain against San Francisco, and people thought, okay, well, maybe they won the game, give them a chance, but it just didn't do anything in the Green Bay game. Of course, only 11 passes. I think they're near the bottom in passing yardage with Houston. So, there's really a lot of pressure on him. He had his first mistake really with the media talking about how players have it way worse than fans as far as losing to the Packers, and he had to backtrack on that. So, there's a lot of pressure on the kid, and he's a young guy, and he's going to make some mistakes. And I think this is a big week for him because they should beat Houston.
Yep, well, it's a bounce back game. Let's hope, and the weather doesn't look so great, just like in the first game. So maybe the weather will help them out a little bit this weekend. And we're out of time, so our thanks to Paul Sullivan, Alice Yin, Steve Daniels, and Hannah Meisel. Thank you all so much. And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. And then immediately after that, Chicago Tonight Black Voices at 6:30. And then, of course, we're back here at 7 o'clock all next week. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe and enjoy this crisp fall weekend.